So, folks, it's time for the final core set review. And in this one, we're going to quickly run through old cards that have been changed, typically buffed in some way or another, and discuss whether or not those are really worth it. And format's probably going to be a little bit different, a little bit quicker here, as we're all rather familiar with these cards. First off, though, I want to drop a big shout out to Hailong, who put together this little site here to showcase all the card changes in a really handy way. So the old card on the left, new card on the right. I'll put a link in the description down there if you guys want to check this out. So up first here is Demon Hunter, and the only card being changed is Warglaives of Azzinoth, going from 6 to 5 mana and from 4 to 3 durability. So cheaper, but losing a durability along the way. And we haven't seen Warglaives in a while, but man, was it really, really strong initially at 5 mana. And clearly losing a durability hurts because you don't have that kind of like 2-turn option where you maybe hit a minion and go face and then wait a turn, hit a minion and go face, or just clear like an entire board of stuff. It's a little bit harder to stretch that extra damage. Maybe you're going to miss a face attack on occasion, but still with the ability to buff this up via various, Demon Hunter attacks, it's scary. That said, I think Demon Hunter shifted a little bit away from this, and in some cases much faster with aggro decks, or making their cards go a little further with things like Soul Fragment Demon Hunter. So I think this could fall in the gap where, because it doesn't quite have that durability, it certainly doesn't reach those levels of old, and compared to the full suite of Demon Hunter cards available today, isn't quite good enough, but still solid. So I'm going to say 3 stars for Warglaives of Azzinoth. So moving over to Druid, we got Mark of the Wild here going up to +3 health instead of +2. That's certainly nice, but ultimately I still don't think this packs quite enough punch. Compared to a card like Hand of Adal, the great thing about that, right, is that it cycles. And you love that card draw aspect. And although Druid's not as in need of card draw as something like Paladin, still there are other buffs and other things that are just going to keep moving through your deck and present more pressure on board than just the simple Mark of the Wild. So I think this is still a 2-star card. Druid of the Claw, getting some changes here. It's going to have a 5/4 with Rush instead of a 4/4 with Charge, and its base stats are also 5/4. This does not make the card any better. The slight stat increase here is not worth the cost of Charge. Druid of the Claw already wasn't being played lately. It certainly did back in the day, but hasn't been a card as of late, and this is not going to change that. This is still, in my mind, a 2-star card. We already talked about Menagerie Warden in a previous video, but just to circle back, the discount here from 6 to 5 mana is nice. It's notably cheaper, but it's still pretty expensive to copy a beast. Like, that's a lot of mana you're committing, which means you're either copying a cheap beast simultaneously, and although there are some great 5-drop beasts available for Druid these days, like Twilight Runner, that's still a 10 mana play, or alternatively, you're trying to keep a beast behind on board. That's not as likely to happen. So I still think this card is moderate at best at 3 stars. Cenarius, going from 9 mana to 8 mana, otherwise staying the same. And you know what? I kind of like this change. I feel like Cenarius was an okay follow-up card for many cases, and just kind of had that flexibility to sometimes build a board versus follow up a board. But 9 mana is such an awkward mana spot and so hard to play, and it still got played occasionally. I think there will be some decks that make room for this at 8 mana, because you're still going to have mana left over to do other things in the same turn, or maybe play a minion alongside it to make sure that buff's stretching a little bit further, making it a follow-up card. Plus, we lost cards like Savage Roar. We still have cards like Arbor Up, but there aren't as many follow-up or damage output cards available for Druid, and this could, despite its cost, fill in that slot. So I'm going to go ahead and say Cenarius might just be a 4-star card for Druid now. Next up here is tracking for Hunter, and there's a lot of debate about whether this is a nerf or a buff. I don't want to get into the crazy weeds details on this. If you're very, very curious to hear my super in-depth perspective, we talked about this a lot on my most recent stream, so you can head to the stream VOD channel. I'll put a link in the description to that VOD, and you can track down my thoughts on tracking. See what I did there? But basically, it's not always a good thing to not discard cards, because Hunter is a class that doesn't usually care about going to the bottom of the deck or fatigue. So sometimes discarding weaker cards when you're picking the best one can actually be an advantage, because you're thinning out your deck. So I don't know that this necessarily makes tracking better in every case, but certainly in some cases, if you're a little more worried about value, it could. And, similar strength card regardless, which I think makes this a 4-star card. I thought tracking was good before, and I think even this version of tracking will also be pretty solid. Lock and Load for Hunter going to 1 mana instead of 2 mana. And at 2 mana, this wasn't a very good card. And at 1 mana, I still don't think this is going to be a very good card. Primarily just because random stuff isn't that great. And in the core set, we even lost some great like random hunter cards you could get. The classics like Animal Companion. But, you know, average card quality might indeed be higher in core sets. That may not necessarily be a bad thing, but ultimately just a bunch of random stuff and committing your entire turn via casting a bunch of spells hasn't historically been something hunters are good at, because first off, they don't have hands that are full enough to really realize this. It is nice that the overhead on it's much lower at 1 mana, so you can squeeze in extra things, but we're losing cards like Rapid Fire and some of the really cheap spell enablers. So I still don't think Lock and Load is going to be a great card, making it 2 stars. Next up for Mage, Snap Freeze going to 1 mana instead of 2. So it's cheap freeze, but it doesn't have that like super utility of a card like Ray of Frost, where you got to use it multiple times, freezing either multiple minions or over multiple turns. So that makes it iffy to me. If it's already frozen destroyed aspect, it's kind of cool, but Mage is losing some freezes as well, so that might even lose utility. Things like Frostbolt and Frost Nova are not going to be in core set. So I still don't think this card gets enough out of itself to really make it worth it for Mage, and they can do so many other cool big things, meaning it's still a 2-star card. Cone of Cold going from 4 to 3 mana, and this is maybe a kind of Frost Nova replacement of sorts. Clearly not going to be as good because it's not a full board, and the 1 damage aspect here for this doesn't make up the difference of, you know, losing all those extra freezes. So just a fine card. I actually think this could still find its way into some decks. It's still pretty solid to lock down a board, get some chip damage through. I always thought Cone of Cold was a little bit underrated, so I'm going to say this one's still a 3-star card. Ethereal Conjurer going from 3 health to 4, which makes it a pretty decent sized body here at 5 mana as a 6/4. It's like kind of awkward. I mean, the health totals may be easy to deal with, but it's high pressure, which means opponents are going to maybe want to have to deal with it. And you're getting a spell along the way, which can be great. I think this is actually going to be a nice little tool for Mage, any sort of slower deck that just needs some mid-range bodies. The one downside here is Mage has a lot of stuff at 5 mana for minions. You've already got like Raz and Jandis and the new legendary Egwin. So this could get crowded out in its mana slot, particularly if there's like any other 5 mana Mage cards that you want to run. But nonetheless, I think it still looks pretty interesting as a 4-star card. Koldara Drake here got the Ogre stat line as a 6/7, otherwise remains the same. You can use your hero power any number of times. You know, this has been one of those cards that you've hoped to get shenanigans out of, and I think it'll be cool to exist as like a random summon, but I don't think Mages put this in their list because the 6 mana overhead is just so high on a card like this. It's really going to be hard to squeeze it into a turn and actually make something happen outside of a really, really niche combo that probably won't actually be very competitively viable, meaning that it is a 2-star card. Flame Strike going to 5 damage instead of 4, and you know what? That's a pretty significant breakpoint. There's a lot of stuff out there lingering around at 5 health. Flame Strike wasn't a great card lately, but it was still okay, and I think it will be slightly better than okay now. I think it'll be a playable card coming in at 3 stars. There will definitely be a Mage list here and there that finds room for this one. It won't be in every Mage list. It won't be probably a super high tier Mage card, but it will absolutely be playable, making it 3 stars. Moving on to Paladin, Argent Protector going to a 3/2 instead of a 2/2. I think there's a pretty minor change to this card. It's really the Divine Shield aspect that you would care about most with Argent Protector. That wasn't enough for it to see play lately at all. I haven't seen this card in a really long time. I don't think that's going to change because of a meager 1 extra attack. It's only marginally better, and they're still way better cards, making it 2 stars. Holy Light going to 8 health instead of 6, but unable to target minions, only able to target your hero in this particular instance now. I don't think this is good enough. Like, yes, of course, there's other cards, you know, Healing Touch or whatever that heal 8 for 3. So you might say, well, this is way better, but it's still not a card that you'd make room for in your list. There are other better ways to heal. Warhorse Trainer going here to 3 attack from 2. That's nice to get at that good 3 mana stat line. This trades way better into a number of different 2-drops, which could be nice. And this is already a good effect. We've seen this work pretty well in different metas, including even in wild format. And we're getting a ton of Silverhand recruit support in Paladin, it looks like. So I think Warhorse Trainer is going to be a really solid card at 4 stars. Equality going down to 3 mana. and Paladin is keeping Consecration, it looks like. So I think this will remain a staple removal tool for Paladin. I think this is going to be an awesome card, even better at 3. Of course, not as good as it was at 2, but still really, really nice. Probably, it's not really a 5-star card. Like, I think it's very, very likely to be played, but I think it's technically still a 4-star card because it's not meta defining necessarily or deck defining. So, a 4-star card here. Guardian of Kings getting some interesting changes. A little bit of a stat bump here, going to 7 health, and gaining Taunt as well, which I think makes this a sort of interesting, like, late game control tool. Suddenly, it's a big annoying body to deal with. It's got some health aspect tied to it. I don't think certainly every Paladin deck is going to make room for this, but could this squeeze itself into a control deck or a late game deck of some sort? Maybe it's slightly more likely to do that, which I think I'm going to give it 3 stars. I think I'd love for that to happen because it's such a cool looking card. Shadow Form here going down to 2 mana. It does lose the boost here if already in Shadow Form, dealing 3 damage, so kind of capping itself out. I think it's interesting. I don't frankly think it'd be great if I didn't know that, or at least based on what Blizzard has said, they keep saying they're going to support Shadow Form. So that makes me want to like it more. It's like, well, probably if they're going to really push Shadow Form, this is going to be a part of that. So this must be a 4-star card. My instincts otherwise would probably still just say a 3-star card, but let's go ahead and give it 4 because we keep hearing Blizzard say, hey, we're going to get Shadow Form stuff, Shadow Form stuff. I hope they don't mean literally just we're going to get Shadow Form. I hope they mean that there is additional support, but giving Priest a ping is fun. Lightspawn here at 3 mana instead of 4 is really intriguing. I think this is actually sort of a really solid card. It comes down as a 4/4, and like, yes, of course it gets weaker as soon as your opponent like trades into it or pings it or whatever. But you know, even an attack or 2 or a ping or whatever leaves it at like a 3/3 or maybe a 2/2 or something, which isn't, you know, that's okay. Like, it's not too bad because it's such a solid start at a 4/4. And of course, there's health buffs and stuff that could also stack on top of this, and healing. I sort of think Lightspawn's going to be a bit of an engine for Priest potentially in the early game to play for more of a tempo style. This is like the most hopeful card I've seen for Priest yet when it comes to that tempo game plan that seems to be designed around quite a bit. So I'm going to say Lightspawn is a 4-star card. Moving on to Rogue, Swashbuckler is going to be from another class instead of your opponent's class, making it good against other rogues because you're still going to be able to generate burgle, thief style stuff off of it, which is a nice bump, and this was already a good card. I think this will be a great way to just start games for Rogue, combo activator, etc. So I'm going to say a 4-star card. Patient Assassin is going to 2 health instead of 1, which makes it slightly better at surviving like random AoEs and stuff and whirlwind style effects, but I still don't think it's going to be any good. Certainly doesn't work as well in like a stealth aggro package, and I don't know why you'd need to run this card in general, so I'm going to say 1-star card. Assassin's Blade going to a 2/5 instead of a 3/4 and coming down in mana cost. Now, this is a ton of durability to work with, so could be great with like weapon buffs and stuff, but compared to Self-Sharpening Sword, it's still not a card that really stands out, and that's been, of course, the driving force for weapon rogues lately. So I unfortunately think Assassin's Blade is probably still just a 2-star card. And Assassinate going to 4 mana instead of 5. I still don't think this is a necessarily great way to kill stuff. That said, Rogue is losing sap, so some of their ways to deal with like bigger things might be checked more than they were in the past. They might have to rely on cards like Assassinate, but I don't think that's a good sign because, you know, 4 mana destroy a thing is not historically amazing in Hearthstone. We prefer like 4 mana polymorphs and stuff because who cares about the 1/1 or the 0/1 on the hex? It's more about silences and just universal removal that takes care of problems. This doesn't take care of problems quite as efficiently as polymorph or hex. And we've seen other cheap removal that's just, you know, like Malevolent Strike already for Rogue is still in the game. It's still going to exist. You know, it's 5 mana at a base and it has this huge upside potentially as well. So essentially, Assassinate just has a lot to compete against, and even with some slight buffs here, I don't think this is good enough. Same actually can be said for Sprint exactly, going from 7 mana to 6. 6 mana draw 4 is just not that exciting. I think cheaper, smaller increments of card draw make way more sense, and compared to cards like Secret Passage that let you see 4 cards for 1 mana versus 6, that's a tough challenge for Sprint to overcome. If there's some kind of shenanigan that's like discounting spells, like Kael'thas style card or a Kael'thas Rogue, Kael'thas actually still in standard format, then maybe this makes a little bit more sense. But as it stands, just on its own, 6 mana draw 4 doesn't feel particularly efficient compared to cards like Overflow or even Nourish for Druid, or the more staple, cheaper card draw options or Secret Passage. Every comparison makes Sprint feel pretty bad here, even at 6 mana. All right, moving over to Shaman. We already covered some of these in a past review. So let's head over to Draenei Totem Carver. It's going to be a 4/5 and gain some nice stats. I always like this card. I still kind of do. I think it's got some interesting promise as a follow-up with like a big, tall body on some totem boards. Whether those are just lingering around or your deck's designed around totems, this could still be a nice mid-game push as like a 5/6, 6/7 pretty easily for 4 mana, maybe even more. So I wouldn't be shocked if this makes its way into a deck here or there as a 3-star card. Tidal Surge is now 4 mana, deal 4, and heal 4. They gave it the lifesteal word, so that's great when dealing with spell damage in particular, because before it always healed 4. Now with spell damage, if you deal 6, you're going to heal 6. That's a pretty big significant upgrade to Tidal Surge, particularly as Shaman appears to be getting some like nature spell damage support and other spell damage cards as well. I think this could be a great swing and heal tool for Shaman decks that run spell damage packages or care about healing at all. So I'm going to say a nice solid 4-star card. We already talked about Earth Elemental. Fire Elemental going to 4 damage here instead of 3. It's a nice change. I always liked Fire Elemental. I thought it was like one of the most playable basic cards. That said, it still didn't really make its way into competitive decks. I don't think the 4 damage ping here makes a difference there. It's still not quite efficient enough. But man, it's still going to be a great budget card. It's going to, when it pops into arena and stuff, you're going to be pumped, I think, because that's a really nice effect on a 6-drop, just not maybe a competitive one. Alakir here going to 6 health instead of 5, which, very occasionally like helps it take maybe an extra trade on board and linger around, but a pretty minor upgrade, all things considered, I'd say here for Alakir. A card that's had some occasional utility here and there. It's like can be a big damage output card, combo enabler. I've already seen some people teasing things with like Ysera and Nightmares and Alakir to pump out like a ton of damage and a potential OTK. I think that stuff will all be fringe, and Alakir will be a fringe card as well, even with this buff, and he'll probably be a 2-star card despite all of that. That doesn't mean he won't ever be played. It just means when he does, it'll be like some kind of crazy tier 4 thing that's like very rarely seen, not a stable part of the meta. Just, very, very fringe, basically. Moving on here to Drain Soul, looking a little bit like Tidal Surge there, but even cheaper here, 2 mana and dealing 3, and with Lifesteal. I think that's great. I think this will be a tool that a lot of Warlock decks are able to run. It's just a great way to clean up cheap minions, keep your health full while life tapping or doing other crazy Warlock things. So this looks like a really solid 4-star card. Void Terror is going to be a 3/4 instead of a 3/3. We've seen some egg stuff teased and some other like destroy your own minion stuff teased. I think maybe Blizzard's building towards that, which I think Void Terror is a really cool card in that scenario. Just stacking up some stats on top of your eggs and stuff could be really cool. So I'm going to say a 3-star card for Void Terror. I think there are some potential meta decks that thing pops into. Lakari Fellhound here is getting a slight change. It's going to be controlled discard as opposed to in the past it was just totally random. So kind of like some of the other discard cards we've seen, he's going to discard the 2 lowest cost cards. And that helps, and it's a 3/8 taunt, which is very disruptive and annoying and sticky to deal with. I always like this card a lot. If we get any additional discard support, this goes potentially pretty far as a discard enabler, and sometimes discarding your lowest cost stuff's not a big sacrifice when you get a big disruptive mid-game minion that like shuts down aggro decks. So this is looking like a playable 3-star card. Siphon Soul coming in at 5 mana here instead of 6. Solid single target removal. The health aspect certainly helps, but still probably going to be a little bit slow for most Warlock decks. They're making bigger plays, doing crazier things, and I don't know if this is going to be worth it. So probably still a 2-star card, sadly, despite my absolute adoration for Siphon Soul. I love this card. And Lord Jaraxxus, now a hero card instead of a minion. He has the same hero power. He's going to summon a 6/6 for 2 mana. You get the same 3/8 weapon, but you don't go down to 15 health when you play him. You stay at your current health total, and in fact, you even get 5 armor on top of it, which I think makes Jaraxxus a legit card. I think I might even give him 5 stars. I think he could be a really powerful tool for a late game Warlock deck. basically to grind out opponents on that just crazy hero power. And the weapon's not bad either. So I think there will be windows where you can play this and feel safe finally and recover on the back of cards like Twisting Nether, which actually is Twisting Nether still in the core set? I think it is. I think we saw it. I'm pretty sure. Or whatever other, Hellfires, whatever other removal tools are still around that Warlock has access to. You can stabilize the following turn and then start utilizing that hero power to crazy extents. Now, we don't have Shadow Flame, I believe, in core based on what I remember looking at. So some of the old tools that Warlock could use to like cheaply regain the board with like hero power Shadow Flame may not exist, but I think it's okay. It's still going to be a great grindy tool. So, this is hopeful as much as anything else, but as one of the only maybe hero cards or few, it might be the only one based on what we know, might be the only hero card in standard format, that could be a huge advantage. And certainly Warlock can play late style games. So I'm going to say, sure enough, this could give Warlock like another huge edge in control matchups. If Ticketus and Yashiraj weren't enough, maybe this stacks on top as a really, really powerful tool. I'm excited to try it. It's probably realistically a 4-star card, but I don't care. I'm going to give it 5 because I freaking love Jaraxxus. Moving on here to Warrior, one tiny change with Warsong Commander. It reads after you summon another minion, give it Rush. So another charge to Rush change here and a way to give a bunch of stuff Rush. So kind of like a proactive Broom in a way, where you put it down and then everything in the future gets Rush. That said, I think it's much worse than an animated Broomstick because that's only 1 mana and this is 3, making the tax on this card a little bit higher, meaning you probably get fewer things out of it in a given turn. Like, sure, if it sticks or survives, that's great. You could get even more Rush minions out of it. But at only 3 health, I think that's pretty unlikely. And compared to cards like Houndmaster Shaw in the past, that had a just much stickier state per mana cost than this one. So I don't think Warsong Commander is good enough even with this effect. And even though we've had some like Rush Warrior decks, I don't think this really changes how viable or competitive those could be. It seems like it wouldn't be as good as the stuff available now. Meaning Warsong Commander, I think sadly maybe remains a 1-star card. All right, so finally moving over to our neutral cards here. Some pretty crazy changes. The cheap charge boys here, Stone Tusk and Bluegill, each getting Rush and a 1-attack bump. I think that makes these pretty darn weak at the end of the day. Like, yeah, sure, they could trade and stuff. And like, yeah, maybe there's some beast synergies, but their output's just not high enough. The reason these cards ever got played in the past was shenanigans, combos, crazy stuff. So I think, unfortunately, that relegates these both to... actually, I think Stone Tusk Boar is probably a 1-star card. I think Bluegill Warriors may be a 2-star card because there's still some like Murloc potential where you're happy to get reactive minions in your Murloc board, and this is a great way to kind of like trade and stabilize Murlocs. I don't know that Stone Tusk Boar has as many angles of play as a beast. There's a lot of other great early game beasts to compete against. Bluegill Warrior still kind of slots in as you need a lot of Murlocs and Murloc decks. So I'm going to go ahead and say 1-star and 2 stars for these. Raid Leader here, getting a slight health buff, which definitely helps, but I don't think it changes this card a ton. I think it's a 2-star card at best. Flesh Eating Ghoul also getting a little bit of an attack buff, pulled up at a 3/3 base. Still don't think that's great enough. At 3 health, it just dies to far too many things. I think this remains a 1-star card. Mini Mage here is kind of intriguing. Spell damage stealth is a combo that seems promising. It still feels like there might be better spell damage cards out there. I think this is cool that it exists in the pool, but probably doesn't make too many deck lists unless you just absolutely have some crazy setup with stealth. So I'm going to say this is a 2-star card at best. Defender of Argus here, kind of intriguing, getting an attack buff, making it a 3/3. And the cool thing about that is like, if you wanted to play this in a more tempo-driven deck, stats do matter, right? And attack matters. It means it can stick around and trade a little bit better on board or present a slightly higher threat on board, which isn't bad. It's kind of in this space right now between like Wriggling Horror and the Fungalmancer of old. The Taunt aspect can be helpful to make boards a little bit tough to deal with, like it was back in the day in Zoo. That said, I think Wriggling Horror is just way more efficient at pumping out stats for its cost. And that's going to better fit tempo decks and any kind of like control deck that might really benefit from Defender of Argus. I don't know. There's probably better tools to two big defensive things. That said, we did see like Humongous Razor Leaf come back into the meta. So is there some angle there for Defender of Argus? Maybe. I'm going to go ahead and give this 3 stars because I wouldn't be shocked if some deck can figure out how to use Defender of Argus. I don't think it's going to be great. I don't think it's going to be, high tier, but keep an eye on it. Gurubashi Berserker going to 8 health instead of 7. That's just not a significant enough difference for a card that virtually never, ever, ever saw play. So I think it remains 1 star. Big Game Hunter pushing down to 4 instead of 5 mana, which is significant. It used to be 3 back in the day, I guess. I wouldn't be totally surprised if this popped into a deck that just needed some tech answers or control tools. It might depend on the meta, if anybody's like cheating out big stuff. Since we're losing cards like Edwin, maybe it's less relevant and there aren't as many giants around these days. But in the right scenario, the right meta where there is a big card that comes down in the mid game, some control deck might need a card like this to help resolve it. And that's exactly why tech cards like this exist. So I think this remains a 3-star card with that occasional meta viability. Karen Bloodhoof here going up to a 5/5 on both halves instead of a 4/5, which is great. That just helps it take better trades, present a little bit more pressure on board. Pretty small buff, but still, it seems like a meaningful break point for this style of card and this stage of the game that it's played in. That said, I still think there are going to be more specific death rattles, more finely tuned things the decks need. This as sort of a general legendary threat doesn't feel quite good enough, and it remains a 2-star card. Swordsman Champion going up to 7/7 here instead of 6/6. That's not a huge stat change at this stage of the game. I think, a mana discount or something would go a lot further for this card, getting it down sooner as a follow-up tool. So as it stands, probably just not good enough as a 2-star card. Baron Stable Hand here going up to a 5/5 instead of a 4/4. Basically exact same story as Swordsman Champion. Stats matter less and less the later into the game you get. And a small 1/1 bump is just not enough. This needed to summon like 3 random beasts or something, or 2, to make it interesting in any way. So Baron Stable Hand is a 1-star card. High Inquisitor Whitemane here, pretty interesting. This is a card that did get a nice discount, and although it lost stats, that might be okay because the effect remains the same, and it seems like it could be a great way to summon a ton of extra stuff. And there might be some deck with like Rush Minions or something where you're able to pull this together. So I have a bit of hope here for High Inquisitor Whitemane, despite not seeing play in the past. This basically means you can combine more things with it in a given turn, and that might make the difference on playability. So I'm going to say Whitemane here is actually a 3-star card. Baron Geddon going to a 7/7 instead of a 7/5, which makes it a little bit stickier, maybe a little bit harder to remove and frustrating. Baron Geddon's like seeing occasional play in like control decks or like warriors that wanted some extra whirlwind style effects. I don't think that's good enough these days anymore, though, and the 2 health here doesn't make a big enough difference for Baron Geddon, so this is still a 2-star card. And Arcane Devourer here going from 5/5 to 4/8 as our final card of this video. And again, it's a nice buff. Like the health makes it much stickier, which you think could be a great asset because you're building on the stat line a lot. So that's nice because it's that like 1 extra turn here that makes Arcane Devourer good in some cases. Where they can't quite kill it, then it becomes this huge threat. But it's still just an 8-mana card that doesn't really do much right away, which is hard in Hearthstone to play, requires a lot of setup and follow-up. So like it'll make a huge difference on the occasion that it's randomly summoned off of something and it sticks, and you're able to blow up off of it because it like lived when it otherwise wouldn't have. That'll be great, but it's still not going to be a card that makes enough sense in constructed Hearthstone. It's just a little bit too slow as a 2-star card. So there you go, folks. That's all the card changes, I believe, for the core set. And it's cool to see some of these cards updated and refreshed. And I think a few went from being, bad to like moderately playable, and a couple maybe went from being moderate to like really, really solid meta entries. So I'm excited to see what happens with some of these cards. There were a couple very powerful options. Warhorse Trainer, I think Jaraxxus is going to look good. So I'm curious to see. So share your thoughts on these cards. Which ones do you hate? Which ones do you love? Which ones can't believe got changed? How did they do that? How did they buff that one? That's crazy. I want to hear all those thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thanks as always for watching all these card reviews. And until next time, game on.